broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our COVID-19 stimulus bills updates and business resources for early childhood programs. My name is Kiami Harris. I am the Director of Learning and Events here at Child Care Aware of America. Thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, I want to say that we will be taking questions. And though we know we have many questions today, some already in the questions box, we will compile the questions that we get and try to send out as many responses later in an email. This session is being recorded and it will exist on our website at childcareaware.org, and it will also be sent out to you later in an email. I'm excited that we have many wonderful presenters today. But first, I want to turn it over to Michelle McCready, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Child Care Aware of America. Michelle.
Hi, Kiami. Can you hear me? Thank you so much.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Great. Thank you, Kiami. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us and carving time out of your incredibly busy schedules right now to join us for what will be a wonderful hour where we're going to talk about the stimulus bill updates and business resources for early childhood programs. We know many of you are working diligently on the front lines to both understand what's available for childcare, early childhood programs. Childcare providers and family members are all joining us today, and we really appreciate it. And our big message here is that we're here for your questions. We're here to support you. We're here to understand your needs as their national childcare organization and be as responsive as possible. So we really appreciate you joining us. Today you will learn about the COVID-19 stimulus bill that was passed almost a week ago and what it means for early childhood programs. We will be sharing information about efforts that are underway to gain additional support for different childcare programs and how you can be a part of them. You will hear an overview of the various business supports that are currently available to help sustain childcare programs during this pandemic and as we all are working to support essential workers and recover. So we have a great lineup of presenters for you. Our first one is Ami Gadia, our Chief of Policy Research and Programs at CCAOA. And Ami oversees our federal and state policy work, our national research, provisions of our training and technical assistance centers. And before Ami came to Child Care Aware of America, she came from the American Academy of Pediatrics, where she was the Director of Federal Advocacy and Regulatory Affairs. We're very happy to have me here. We also have a special guest, Wanda Kaiser. She is a child care financial consultant, and Wanda has a CPA with over 20 years of experience in nonprofit organizations. She works closely with the board of directors and executive management in many areas of finance, and including accounting, auditing, budgeting, grant management, and human resources. So she's going to be a terrific wealth of knowledge for us on the call today. We also have another talented staff at Child Care Aware of America, Elizabeth Goodman, our Chief Financial Officer. And Elizabeth joined us, and she previously served as Source America's Senior Vice President of Finance, where she oversaw accounting, business intelligence, investments, finance assistance, contracting, pricing, and much more. And she's also a terrific resource and wealth of knowledge in understanding and helping the childcare community understand the different opportunities right now with the stimulus bill and beyond. So with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to this talented team. And again, thank you all so much for joining us. And Ami.
Thank you so much.
I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as Michelle said, in the middle of this really stressful time, I'm going to walk through some of the recent happenings in Congress with regards to the COVID-19 stimulus response. So there are 3 bills that have been passing over the last, I would say, roughly month or so. You've probably heard lots of mentions in the press about stimulus bills, and maybe hard to sort of sort through how each one is different from the other. So I will walk through I will walk through what the differences are between the 3. The first one, which was signed into law on March 6th, was the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. So this one was the first one out of the gate, I think, before a lot of us were sheltering in place or sort of shutting down the way we're shut down now. This first federal response to the novel coronavirus focused on providing $8.3 billion in emergency funding, focusing primarily on the health response. So a large portion of this first act was directed to federal, state, and local health agencies for prevention and mitigation. This first stimulus bill also opened nearly $7 billion in low-interest Small Business Administration, or SBA, loans for some businesses impacted by the pandemic. While loans, we understand, are not going to be a sustainable solution for many childcare providers, there is more information available if you are interested in availing yourself of those loans. And my colleague Elizabeth Goodman will be speaking with more specifics about the different business support, small business support pieces. The second bill that was signed into law on March 18th was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So this second response package aims to support vulnerable workers and families affected by the coronavirus, including important expansions to nutrition programs, Medicaid, and to provide free testing for COVID-19. The Families First law also provides emergency paid sick leave and expansion of the Family and Medical Leave Act to cover some paid leave for some workers. And I will direct you to a link that has a lot more broken out about these paid sick leave and family medical leave provisions in that second stimulus bill. So you can read more details at the link I will share with you. The third coronavirus aid or stimulus bill that was signed into law was just signed into law last Friday on March 27th. This is the one that you may have referred to as the CARES Act. It's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. This is the one that is most of interest, certainly, to us, and gets more squarely where we think Congress needs to be by creating a $3.5 billion down payment in the form of an increase to the Child Care and Development Block Grant. So this bill, the CARES Act, is the largest coronavirus response package to date. This is the $2 trillion measure. And as I mentioned, we think it's the most significant of the 3 because it includes dedicated child care funding, expanded unemployment insurance, and new Small Business Administration grants and loans, as well as individual assistance. That's that $1,200 check that you might have heard about in the news. It also provides support for our healthcare system. Let me talk through the $3.5 billion down payment, which is how Child Care Aware of America refers to the CARES Act, increase to the CCDBG program. This funding is intended to help states maintain child care operations and support first responders and healthcare workers. States may spend CCDBG funds on the existing purposes under the law, including payments to providers, even in cases of decreased enrollment, to ensure they remain open or reopen when supported. The funds can also be used for payments to providers to pay salaries or wages to childcare staff. The funds can also be used to provide childcare to essential personnel without regard to income eligibility. And the funds can be used to provide cleaning and sanitation assistance to all providers. under the law, child care resource and referral agencies can be a part of this support mechanism and these purposes to help lift up child care providers. So it is intended to be a beginning sum of money as a shot in the arm to the industry, but as I'll get into in a moment, there is a lot more support needed for the child care system. The CARES Act also includes some specific small business supports, as I touched on briefly, and Elizabeth will get into those in much greater detail. So what's next for Congress? While the dedicated funding for child care that passed into law, or was signed into law, excuse me, last Friday in the CARES Act is welcome, it is frankly much lower than the $50 billion request made by CCAOA, our national partners, and by the child care community. As a result, CCAOA is urging Congress to provide robust, direct aid to the child care system to ensure it can provide support our healthcare, emergency, and other essential workers who are on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic, and ensure there is a child care system at the end of this national emergency. We understand that this is a moment at which many policymakers who may not have heard the clarion call of how important child care is to our entire system before may be hearing it now. And we are trying to, through our advocacy, communicate to them that this is about helping all of you make it through this crisis now, but also making sure that you are able to run your businesses and care for your communities in the future. So what I will do is one of my colleagues will send you a link to an action alert that CCAOA has up on its website right now. What I would ask of all of you is to let Congress hear your voice, let them know exactly what it is they need from you. And if you click on the link in our chat, the Take Action, you will see that the ask is for $50 billion, for Congress to provide $50 billion to childcare to help them move forward. So we think that Congress really needs to hear as loud and as vocal an outcry as possible. And so if you can take that action, if you can share that with your friends and your neighbors so they can send their message to their member of Congress in both the House and the Senate, that will help us to push Congress to do the right thing here. I believe there was a question in the chat as to whether the provisions apply to home-based childcare providers as well as center-based, and the answer is yes. Now, with regards to specific, so one of the things that CCAOA has been lifting up in its advocacy work is the specific needs of home-based providers as being different from childcare providers, center-based providers, excuse me, but the provisions apply in the CARES Act to all kinds of childcare providers. So I'll stop there. I know it was a lot of information. There's a lot of links here on this slide that you're looking at. The Take Action Now link is the same as the one that you received in the chat a few minutes ago. And the link under More Information At is the blog link that goes into some of these bill details in more specificity. Finally, that last link is a great resource that I would urge you to come back to. CCAOA has a large resource hub around the COVID-19 response, and we've got state-by-state maps, information so you can access your CCR&Rs and other specifics in your state, as well as grab-and-go resources that you can use in your childcare programs. So with that, I will turn it over to Wanda.
Hello, this is Wanda Kaiser. I am a consultant for many child care facilities. First, want to let you know you're not in this alone. This organization, I am honored to help present today. They are out there helping folks, and I hope this information will help you in the days ahead. We're concerned for you because of your lost revenue. A lot of you are not having children attend, obviously, so you're not receiving any revenue from different sources. Continuing to pay your staff, we will research and help you understand how you can better come up with money from the government or other grants to help you pay your staff and their benefits, to continue them with a job so that childcare can continue when this is over. Paying your fixed costs is also covered in some of the opportunities that we will be covering. One of my concerns, because I have a lot of ministries that I work with, is the unemployment. We will be researching that. So you will know whether ministries will be able to apply, employees will be able to apply for unemployment. And most of all, I think we're all concerned about the health risks to our staff, our parents, and our children. You're not in this alone. And I thank you for being on this call so that we can better serve you. I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Are you available?
Yep, this is Elizabeth Goodman. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Child Care Aware. And I've done a lot of research over the last couple of days, it seems like months at this point, trying to ensure we are providing you with the most recent information that we have. I know many of you are spending time dealing with just the changing business needs, and working on how to stay current on fast-moving news is difficult. So we're attempting to pool some of the resources together so that you're aware of what is available and really what you should be leveraging to help you through this time. So I'll start with my disclaimer. This information literally changes daily. We are trying to keep up on all the different information, but even some of the information that is out, the regulations haven't been created yet, the details underneath them. So a couple of things are still moving targets, and as we learn more, we continue to post those out. I will remind you, as did Ami, that we do have that resource site. That's the first link in my presentation slide, and this is where we're posting everything that as we learn it, and we try to keep that current. So please remember to keep and check that on a regular basis. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of federal memos, which are outside of the CARES Act. One is the IRS relief for taxpayers. And you might say, well, I know I'm getting $1,200, but what else is that? What other benefits are there? And that's really the delay of the payment of your payroll taxes and your income tax returns. Anything due on April 15th. If you're a nonprofit entity, you may not have a filing due on April 15th. It's generally due May 15th. That deadline has not been addressed, so you need to kind of be attentive to see if they're going to fix that when they realize that. It does reference corporation and self-employment taxes that are due, but anything again that's due on April 15th is extended to July 15th. At least that should give you some cash flow assistance and any deadlines for filing, some assistance there. The next document that I want to talk about, and there's links to that, that IRS memo, are two memos that came out from OMB, and it's number 11 and number 17. And really 17 is the more pertinent one. It's a little clearer because they realized they need to clarify some things that came out in that number 11 memo. This is really only if you have federal grants directly, or you're applying for a federal grant. So this is not related to loans that we're going to look at under the SBA. This is a separate distinct grant. So again, this may not be pertinent to any of you. So I just want to highlight that it's there and it's available, and does some delays on single audit requirements and costing under a federal grant. If it doesn't apply to you, you don't have to link or check any of those out. Now what I want to do is spend most of my time on the CARES Act. If you have some free time, which I don't have, and I'm sure you don't either, I actually provided you the link to the text. It's interesting, but the information that's coming out on this next slide, thank you, that is really coming out is much more helpful. So there are two things I want to cover. One is the Small Emergency Business Loan, and one is the Paycheck Protection Program, or it's called the PPP. Now, I want you to note very carefully that, in my opinion, almost every one of you should be looking at the item that's called the Small Emergency Business Loan. Basically, it's for economic injury. It's designed to be a disaster loan, and you can apply online at the SBA site up to $10,000. It's in advance of a BEAR program, but my understanding is they will process it very quickly. So again, if you're dealing with a cash flow situation as your business is impacted, they will get that $10,000 very quickly to you. It's one of the only programs where you go to the SBA site, and I've provided a link on that application process. If you click on that, it walks you through the application process. What is probably more pertinent from a bigger picture is the Paycheck Protection Program. Now, it's interesting, there's some conflicting information here, so I'm going to tell you both what it says and what it doesn't say. So remember, this specific program is a loan designed to provide direct incentive to small businesses. If you're a small business or a sole proprietor, you have always had access to SBA loans. If you are a nonprofit, you have not historically had access to SBA loans. That's one of the biggest changes under this act, is to also address that allowance. So you are now all three eligible to apply for these loans. It's important to note that it's designed to be a forgiven loan if you keep your employees on payroll for 8 weeks and the money is used for payroll, rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. So basically your cost of doing business. It's available only through June 30th, and you can start applying at tomorrow, allegedly, for the SBA site, but literally the banks got information yesterday on how to do this. So I would be surprised if anyone will be able to really act that fast, but they say that you can apply through your bank as of tomorrow if you are an organization. If you are self-employed, you are not shut out of this program. However, you can't apply until next Friday, which is when they'll begin starting to take applications then. It's very unclear on if you are a church. It does not specifically address whether you'd be eligible for these. And many times, if you're not excluded, in general, the government will allow you to be included. My suggestion is you pursue this regardless of the lack of clarity right now. And I even confirmed with our own corporate bank this morning, and they're uncertain as to how that works. But I have looked at the application form that's available on the SBA website, and that is on the last link on that page. And it only asks if you're a nonprofit. It doesn't say what it is. The language in the communication that's out publicly and on the website, it's for small businesses with less than 500 employees. That includes sole proprietorships, independent contractors. So if you're self-employed or you work as a contractor under someone, and the self-employed, all these are included. Also, private nonprofit organizations, that's the wording used, so it does not specifically state what 501c classification, and it adds a 501c19 veteran organization. All of these entities can apply for this program. So what, again, let me rephrase what it is. It allows you to borrow, here's some information. One place it says up to 2 months salary. The application actually lists 2.5 months salary. So up until I saw this most recent fact sheet, everything I'd read 2.5 months salary. So be aware, I'm not sure which one's going to happen when you get through. But when you apply, it covers basically your salary outlays the 2 months prior to the COVID impact. you would have to go in, tell the bank what your last 2 months' salary has been, and that's what they'll apply for. What's really interesting is that per the banker, again, who's just getting fast information, it's expected that the application process will be fairly simple. Here's my 2 months, 2.5 months of salaries I paid. Here's my ownership structure. If I'm a nonprofit, I'm a for-profit. And you will process through and they will give you a loan. There are some disqualifiers. Basically, it's pretty unusual, but there are some 3 or 4 questions, and you can see on that sample application if there's any disqualifiers. If you're barred from federal work, they disqualify you. So there are a few things that would qualify you, but in general, they're pretty limited on the disqualifications. When you get the money, you'll get the money from the bank, which is why you need to go through your bank. And when you then you can spend it for the next couple of months. There's no interest. There's no payment for 6 months. It's not due for 2 years. What's really great news is even if you borrow more and don't use all where you can get it forgiven, and I'll talk about that in just 1 second, the interest rate is only 0.5% for nonprofit. Now let's talk about the fact that you can get some of it forgiven. If you maintain employees for 8 weeks, and then your loan can be forgiven. Of that amount, remember you borrowed 2 months of salary, so that's effectively if you pay it all out in salaries. And salary allows for salary, benefits, insurance, all the things, even pension contributions, retirement plan contributions. All of that is eligible. You can't spend more than 75% of what you borrow on salaries. And anything else can be spent on some restricted approved expenses. And I think you heard that earlier. That's rent, mortgage, interest, utilities. So interesting questions. We've had a lot of questions about unemployment. I think the goal of the CARES Act is to actually not have everyone go through this process, borrow for 2 months worth of people's salaries, pay them so they don't have to go on unemployment. And we will talk about unemployment in just a second. I also want to remind you that there's a clause in the CARES Act, which is unrelated to the loan, that allows you to have refundable payroll tax credits for employees who've had revenue reduced by 50% or more. And that's basically $5,000 per employee. So there's really a whole lot of financial incentive here through this plan to keep employees on your payroll and give you some financial benefits by delaying some things and giving you some tax credits. Now talk about a lot of information. That's a lot of information in a short period of time, but we will continue to keep these updated. And I've provided you some links. That one that says to understand details, the second one from the bottom, is actually a really good document that I thought was a good summation. And of course, the application. Remembering the Paycheck Protection Program, you go through your bank. Let's go to the next slide. So I just want to touch a little bit on sick leave and unemployment because we've seen some questions in advance come through. And there are some temporary rules under the stimulus package that address sick leave for employees and changing the allowance for sick leave and FEMLA protection through December 31st, 2020. There's also a new document that you need to post. And so there's some links here. So the very top link just gives you some information on that requirement. The last link is actually a poster that is the updated poster that you need to post. So quick, easy way to get it printed and stick it up on your board at your place of employment. The other thing it does, the DOL has come out with, is they've really given flexibility to the states to administer their unemployment. The challenges with me trying to help you figure out what unemployment is each state's unemployment differs. But what the federal government did is it added an additional $600 to the state's unemployment payments. Now what that is that's funded by the state. I'm sorry, it's funded by the federal government, and it will not count against an organization's unemployment rates. But in fact, in some cases, some individuals could make more on unemployment than they would working. And that is a little counterintuitive because, of course, the whole thing we just talked about, the Paycheck Protection Program, is an incentive for you to keep your staff on staff and paid and not go through unemployment. So a little bit of contradictory things there. What you might be trying to do for an employee might have a different thought when they see that amount that's available. By all of my research to date, if your organization is exempt from unemployment tax, and that's generally a church, then that individual is not eligible for unemployment. I highlight that because that's when churches really want to go back to this Paycheck Protection Program and see if they can go through that to help their employees continue to be paid for that 8-week period. And again, 8 weeks, I think at the time of the coronavirus package and the CARES Act, was expected to more than cover the window of time that people would be impacted. But for those of you who live in Virginia like I do, the actual stay-at-home order goes all the way through June 1st, I think, or June 10th. So that certainly exceeds the original thought, I think, of 8 weeks. So we may see some changes come through in that area. So again, each state differs. There is a link on that middle DOL coronavirus site that will take you to your specific state's information to see how that's going to work. So again, I know that's a lot of information and I'm happy to address questions. Each one might not be covered because again, we're learning as we go, but for things we don't know, we'll do our best to research those. And with that, I'll hand it back to the team who would oversee any questions from the group. Cindy, I think you're going to administer questions. You're on mute if you think you're not.
While we work out the technical difficulties, we'll just urge folks to take a look at the chat and see if your question has already been asked or not. And if it hasn't, please add it in the chat.
I will ask, I did see one question beforehand that was asked. So let me go ahead, Ms. Elizabeth, and talk about that. There was a question about an individual who is provides at-home childcare and is a sole proprietor, and would they be covered? And so I hope you picked that up, that the Payment Protection Program, you are eligible as a sole proprietor or a self-employed individual to bring to your bank the information on how much you were paid, what your income was for those 2 months, and that's the amount that would be lent to you. And then of course, then in that case, you would then have to submit. Again, the rigor on that program, by the way, is going to be showing, and it's unknown how rigorous this is going to be, showing how you spent those funds, but you're going to have to be able to prove it. So make sure you keep good records, because then you're going to want to go back to your bank, submit all that documentation to get the amount you borrowed converted to a grant, because that's the best part about this Paycheck Protection Program. If you can submit the information per their guidelines, which has not been officially distributed yet, then you'll be eligible to have that waived as a grant, and you will not have to repay it. Another question that we saw was if you are in the process of buying a daycare facility, a child care facility, and and you were going to now need the money for that, would you be eligible for these loans? You would be eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program loan, but you would be eligible for standard SBA loan, so the rates wouldn't be as good as they are under the Paycheck Protection Program, but you would be eligible for an SBA loan. So I would go to your bank and see if you can get a standard SBA loan. I will say the beauty of the Paycheck Protection Program, there's no collateral required, no individual guarantee. Under the traditional SBA loan program, there are both guarantees required, in addition to collateral often.
There is a question for Ami. Ami, how do we work with our CCRNRs to deal with all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different ways that your CCRNRs can be helpful. And you can also, just before I forget, you can find the information for your CCRNR and how to contact them on our website, childcareaware.org. But what I will mention is since the child care resource and referral agencies reach about 99% of zip codes, we think that if you want to talk to your CCRNRs about things like getting access to supplies, they can help you with that. We know that a lot of you are in need of certain supplies if you are open to keep your facilities clean, but that it's very difficult to get to the store and purchase these things when you are in the middle of taking care of children. So I would talk to your CCRNRs about that. The other big thing that CCRNRs can be helpful with is connecting those providers who may have vacancies to take on the children of essential personnel with the personnel who need that care. So the CCRNRs are working to connect the openings and to understand who is open and who's unable to be open with the folks elsewhere in the state. And so we would urge you to contact them to offer up, what your status may be, so that if you are taking children, you can get them, you can get connected with those families. The CCRNRs also, as always, have technical assistance abilities to support families in helping to find you and contact you. They have information to help you stay open in a way that is going to be safe for those of you who are able to stay open or are being asked to stay open to take on children of essential personnel. And CCAOA's website at childcareaware.org features a hotline and a live chat feature to answer questions from families and providers, as well as connect them with their local CCRNRs. One last thing I'll mention is that CCRNRs do also do some training around coping with emergencies and rapid response. So as the days and weeks wind on with this particular crisis, they will be able to help you get the resources you need to understand how to rebuild.
Thank you, Ami. Ami, another question. When will the $3.5 billion in the CARES Act be available to us?
Thanks, Candy. That's a good question. So the legislation or the act was signed into law last Friday with that $3.5 billion. That is going to, as we speak, there is some interpretation happening at the federal level of exactly how that $3.5 billion will be effectuated. And so I think the answer to that question is soon. But given that the law was just signed last Friday, it'll take a few days for the administrative pieces to wrap around that and get that money flowing. So soon is the short answer.
Thank you, Ami. I've noticed a few questions about child care programs that have temporarily closed and encouraging their staff to claim unemployment in about mid-March. And the question is, can they rehire these teachers even though their center will remain closed until we know it's safe for the children and teachers to reopen?
This is Elizabeth. From all I read, that actually they're going to give you an incentive to rehire those individuals. And in the amount, as many as you rehire and you can show that you paid, are the ones that are the amounts of that loan that will be forgiven if you give that payroll, that Paycheck Protection Program from SBA. And again, I want to follow up one thing as you think about how you do that. You go through your bank. Not every bank that you may be dealing with historically has been an SBA lender. Call an SBA 7A lender. But right now, SBA is working to expand the number of lenders so that there won't be a chokehold on the banking system. And again, bankers, literally, we bank with one of the largest banks in our area, and they were literally getting information yesterday to learn how to handle this. So your newer banks really won't have a lot of experience, but the application is pretty simple and doesn't require a lot of information. So you might want to contact your bank to see if who you bank with now and see if they are an approved lender. And if not, then make some calls in the area to find a bank in your area that is an approved lender.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Another question. I am the director of an early childhood center that is connected to a private school. Does this limit our access to any of the stimulus package?
It should not limit it. There are some instances where they will count the number of employees of the entire affiliated entity. They've exempted that for restaurants, but they have not for the situation you're speaking to. As long as the combined number of employees is less than 500, you should still be able to apply. I don't think that's going to hit any of our entities unless you're really associated with a bigger organization that you're providing childcare under that umbrella. In general, I think all of us should be eligible to stay within that, under that 500 employee threshold. So I would encourage you to go ahead and start that process.
And just while I'm pulling up another question, I know the audio has been cutting in and out for some of you. Just to let you know that there will be a recording available of today's webinar. We apologize for any technological problems that may be occurring during this webinar. Elizabeth, another question for you. Do you know, oh, I'm sorry, start over again here. For someone who's been doing childcare for many years in their home with no employees, will this apply for that person as well?
Yes, and this is an example again of where the self-employed individuals, again, a reminder that self-employed individuals have to wait another week. Organizations can apply for the SBA loan through your bank starting tomorrow. But if you are self-employed or sole proprietor, that actually start date per the SBA is next Friday. So you can start the process with your bank sooner. But in both cases, again, just a reminder, because I know this is a lot of information, in both as self-employed or sole owner and an organization who may employ many individuals, you should in both cases try for that $10,000 advance. And one thing I'll talk about that I've heard already is that you can actually apply for more than $10,000. The $10,000 is generally assumed to be not collected. So if you apply for that $10,000, while it's going to look like a loan, they actually will not require you to repay that $10,000. The first thing I told you should always try for. You can apply for more than $10,000, and you can actually apply for that at the same time you apply for the payment protection plan and see which one comes through first. because you always convert one into this second more beneficial plan. So anything that you borrow under the emergency program, first $10,000 will not be required to be repaid, but amounts over that will be required to be repaid. So if you are kind of worried about who's going to work faster, you can do one and then request as soon as they get the payroll protection one up and running and approved to flip that application over into that program. And so you can do that 2 months of salaries and payroll related expenses and some operating expenses and get your collection of that converted into a grant versus a loan.
Candy, this is Ami. I just wanted to add one more thing because I know that this is a lot of information coming at all of you, and it's flowing fast and furious. We understand that members of Congress, certain members of Congress, are holding online town halls for their constituents to walk through some of the provisions of the CARES Act. So we would urge you to check social media or the website for your member of Congress, either House or Senate. And similar to what Elizabeth mentioned, the senators from Maryland did. I know Representative David Price from North Carolina is doing a town hall today. That may be another place to both get some information and get some access to resources from the Small Business Administration and the Treasury Department on how to make all this work. And it may also be an opportunity to lift up some of the concerns that you have specifically as child care providers.
I mean, that's a really good point. This is Elizabeth again, and one of the things we're working on is putting together a white paper that summarizes the vast amount of information that we talked about the financials and the applications, and getting that out onto our site. So again, that's another resource for you. We'll keep updating that information and trying. I know lots of follow-on webinars and training, and we'll try and keep you up to date on the most pertinent things that would be beneficial to you as child care providers.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have been receiving a lot of questions about credit scores. So do credit scores impact the loan eligibility?
That's a great question. When I spoke with our corporate banker yesterday and asked him kind of how does he see this happening, there's no guarantee on this and there's no collateral. And he believes, again, he was still waiting on getting some more guidance from SBA. He believes it will be you walk in, you prove what you need to prove. They do ask for your tax ID number, but we do not anticipate that there will be any underwriting, which is where they look at your credit score, and from there they will fund you up to that amount. Because I think the intention is they don't expect to need you to pay it back, because if you can show that you spent 2 months of payroll before the month, they're going to presume you can spend that amount of money back on payroll again. So I think they're presuming that what they're lending you is going to be a grant. And I will tell you that while they can start, you can start doing applications until as of tomorrow. You only have, let me scroll back to my notes, until I think June 1st to actually apply. So and of course there's only so much money. Now our corporate banker doesn't think it'll go fast, so I don't think you need to run to the bank tomorrow. But at the same time, I don't think I would wait, particularly in situations where the earlier question was, where you've laid off staff and you can bring them back sooner. Again, the sooner you get that application in, the faster you'll get those funds to rehire and pay your staff.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Another question, if someone owns more than one child care program, would they be able to qualify to receive resources for both of their programs?
Yes, in that case, I think you would apply both. So if you have different tax ID numbers, you would apply them separately. If you are running under just your tax ID number based on the application form I saw, I think you'd apply for it under one. The two probably can't, again, have more than 500 employees, which is probably not a problem. But as long as those two entities, and based on if there's different tax ID numbers or just one tax ID number, you can apply. You can actually apply for all the programs all at the same time, but what they were very specific about in the most recent seminar I've heard is you cannot double dip. You can't get grant funding for it for something more than once. So if you get it for grant funding for one thing, you can't use that same basis for another grant. So just as you do that, be very clear with your banker that you've got two entities and they're two separate buckets of money that you went funding for. So they can guide you as to whether that needs to be one application or two. And then there's no question that you're not asking for double the money for the same situation. You're actually asking it for two locations.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And we'll try to answer a few more questions. And as we're doing that, if we could advance to the next slide, please. So we will be sharing these slides with you after the presentation, where you'll be able to access all of the links that you saw in the different slides. And here you can see how you can contact us with more of your questions. We have a hotline, a 1-800 number that you can reach us at. We also have a chat. You can access the chat from childcareaware.org's website, and there's a screenshot here to show you what it looks like. On the bottom it says live chat, and then you can ask your question in the window. So we'll answer a few more questions now.
I had someone ask just to confirm when the small business application, when you can start applying for that.
So the small business application for the $10,000 one you can do today. It's been available apparently for a couple of days. The specific Paycheck Protection Program, that's the one that's 2 months of your salary, your payroll records. That's tomorrow for organizations, self-employed, sole proprietor, one-person entities. That's next Friday the 10th.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
And there was another question of clarification. I believe it was on the small business loan, about 75% of it going toward salary. Could you clarify that?
Certainly. I know there's an amazing amount of details on this. So to have the amount you borrow forgiven, so granted, you have to have spent 75% or more on salary and related expenses. So that can be salary, benefits, and retirement plan payments. The remaining 25% or less than 25% or less is restricted to approved expenses, and the general description still on approved expenses, and they'll get more specific, I think, as they get closer, is rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. Fixed overhead costs that you incur regardless of whether you're fully staffed or fully running or not. And there are some language points that are a little unclear, so I want you to be aware of this and sensitive to this. There is some language that says if you have part of your staff you retain, so some people do go unemployment, then part of it will be forgiven. But it's very unclear as to what that looks like at this point. I'm assuming SBA will get a little clearer on that. But I think their goal is for you to bring all of your employees back and pay them, even if they can't come into your facilities if you have to shut down.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One more question. A provider just opened in January. Would they qualify for the loan? And does it include owner salary?
Yes, so it's all of your payroll records, which includes salary to the owner. The owner, and I laugh when they make thresholds. It's the threshold for any individual owner is $100,000 annualized. So if you're getting paid more than $100,000, then aren't eligible for the full amount, only up to the $100,000. In that case, you've only opened in January, so you're probably going to have to use January and February numbers, even though in theory they're less than you would have otherwise planned to have, because you're not open for the full. You haven't really run and been open and had 2 full months of salary. But my expectation is that's all you would be able to submit would be the payroll records for January and February.
Hey, Ami, do you have anything you want to add before we close the webinar for today, or Elizabeth or Wanda?
No, not unless there are other questions.
This is Elizabeth. All I want to do is I sympathize with you trying to run your businesses and learn about all these things. So please use us as a resource. We'll try and keep you up to date on things as we learn them and keep that information posted. And best of luck on pursuing and getting some of this financial assistance available through the government.
All right, thank you for attending today's webinar. And just remember, we do have our hotline number and chat available for other questions. We encourage you to go to those links that were shared today. Those will be helpful resources and to really explore the details. We know it's a lot of information that was shared today. We will be making the PDF of the webinar available, so you'll have those links and the recording as well. So thank you for joining us today.